what you've accomplished and what you've done. I just think it's unfortunate that, unlike the sort of fair arbiters of this on both sides of the aisle who've dismissed it, I appreciate the way you've sat there and addressed all of that stuff. And that really brings me to the larger implication. You talked a lot about your uncles. One of them served in Baltimore, is that right? As a police officer?
My brother was a police officer in Baltimore.
The gentleman over there?
Yes.
Who volunteered to serve in the United States military?
Yes.
And you have talked about that police work, right?
Yes.
I live in Newark. I love my city. If you cut me, I bleed bricks. And the nickname of our city is Brick City. Your brother and I probably understand something. The majority of murder victims in the United States of America, do you know who the majority of murder victims are?
I don't.
They're black men. I imagine in your conversations with your brother and your two uncles, you who patrolled some of these streets, I imagine you feel in a different way about the anguish of what many communities of color struggle with when it comes to crime. Am I right there?
You are right, Senator. It is very anguishing, and it is something that I know all too well.
And you are a person that has that same fear that many mothers have for their daughters who do go out in this world. My mom used to say, when you have a child, it's like your heart going around outside of your body all of a sudden. And I just find it hard to believe, given your law enforcement background, you're a mom, that you take any of this urgency to keep America safe. And then I see that, like, folks I know well. I've worked with the FOP. I began negotiating with them. I have to say, I thought Jim Pascoe, before I knew him, it's a whole thing, Brene Brown, bring people close. At first, I thought he was an ogre, biggest police union in I had some tough negotiations with my police union. He and I sat down and we shared our stories. And I think we realized we were coming from the same place when we were working on police reform. FOP endorsed you, and they wrote a powerful letter. I won't read it again. The IACP, they represent the largest, that's the rank and file, the FOP. The IACP represents the bosses, the managers. They endorse you. There's another group that maybe my colleagues don't know as well as I do. It's called Noble. Do you know them?
I do.
They're the black law enforcement organization nationally. People like your brother.
Yes.
Who love their communities.
Yes.
Who have seen, like I have, too many young men lying with bullet holes, bleeding into our pavements. These are folks who come from communities like your brother knows, where you too often see sidewalk shrines to murdered youth. I've talked to the women and men of Noble so many times. Anybody ever accuse them of being soft on crime? But they understand the complicated factors of crime in our country. And what they have to say to you about you, I won't read it, is just beautiful. Law enforcement family, mother of two, law enforcement organization after law enforcement organization, victims advocacy organizations after victims advocacy organizations, Republican appointed judges, Democratic appointed judges. That's who's in your corner. We're politicians. We have a sworn oath right now. I've just watched you with dignity and grace field what I can only imagine is behind those questions, is this doubt that is being sown. I just want America to know that when it comes to my family's safety, when it comes to Newark, New Jersey, or my state, God, I trust you. I trust you. Now, I brought in your mother, and I have to go back there. My mom has a saying that is awfully embarrassing when she talks about me. She says, she'll introduce me, and she'll say, behind every successful child, is an astonished parent. But there's something about your mother looking at her is that she doesn't seem all too astonished. She seems like almost just very slyly she knew that a day like this might come. And so I just want to share with you that I have done a lot of hiring. Before I was in a legislative body, I ran New Jersey's largest city. And I could write a book about all the management mistakes I made in my first year and how it made me a really good manager. And the first mistake I made was I was just looking for the most talented, credentialed, skillful, smart people to help me run things. And I soon learned it wasn't enough. I made some mistakes in hiring. And I began to see that those skills, which you have a tremendous amount of, it's been said so many times, if stacking you up against other Supreme Court justices, you have more qualifications, more credentials than many of them. But I learned that you should hire first, that's necessary credentials, but not sufficient, that you should hire for character. That's what made me hire a great team in Newark eventually. And we operated so well. And so I believe I've gotten to know your character over these weeks, but I want America to know a little bit more about your character right now. And so I know my values. Booker T. Washington said it. James Baldwin said it. Children are never good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them. If I want to know your character, you haven't let me do this yet, but I want to hang out with your parents a little bit. And so let's draw them into this conversation. We won't swear them under oath, but just could you share with me what are their bedrock values that are most a part of your values now that you hope and pray are your grandchildren's, unborn grandchildren's values? What are those most important values you inherited from those two folk over there?
Thank you, Senator. I inherited a number of bedrock values, as you say, from my extraordinary parents. As I mentioned, my parents grew up in a time in this country in which Black children and white children were not allowed to go to school together. They persevered. They were the first in their families to go to college, to have that chance. They each went to historically Black universities, and they taught me hard work. They taught me perseverance. They taught me that anything is possible in this great country. And I think it came, as I said in my introduction, from the sea change that we had in this country from the 1960s when Congress passed 2 Civil Rights Acts and African Americans finally had the chance to become a part of the dream, become a part of the fabric of this wonderful nation. My parents moved to Washington, D.C. because this is where it all started for them in terms of having new freedoms. And I was born here on that hope and dream. I was born here with an African name that my parents gave me to demonstrate their pride in who they were and their pride and hope in what I could be.
And it seems to me, as a guy whose parents came here and you and I both were born here months apart, I would hear my parents' tough stories at the dinner table about facing bigotry. Here in the city, my father told me stories about his early jobs, but I never noticed a hint of bitterness or that hate he saw never generated hate with him. In fact, he just loved people, all people.
That is correct, Senator. And I would say that my wonderful parents went on to become extraordinary public servants. They had new opportunity. They could have done, other things, but each of them decided to give back to the community. My mother was in the public school system. She was a teacher and then became an administrator, became the principal of a magnet school for the arts in Miami, a new school that had started up and became the sort of beloved principal of New World School of the Arts. And so many of her students continue to see me, meet me, and they know me for my mother, which is fantastic.
And she had diverse students.
She had extraordinarily
And she
diverse.
loved on all those children.
Everyone.
Black, white, Asian.
Everyone.
Well, let me ask you this, because I'm going to push you a little harder, because I have some people I really respect on the other side of the aisle, and they do. My friends and I talk about religion sometimes. Faith is important. I was teasing Lindsey, Senator Graham earlier, but I don't want to ask you anything specific about your faith except for this, because you brought it up in your opening statement, and I have to tell you, I don't think Black women have any providence over struggle. People from all backgrounds in America struggle. But I do know often as the trailblazing Black women, they have often faced many challenges being the first or being a trailblazer or breaking glass ceilings. But I know on your journey to this moment right now, you have faced very tough moments. Probably you've been knocked down by life. I always say if America hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. You've been heartbroken by something, circumstance. You've been like Zora Neale Hurston, who says, I've been through sorrow's kitchen and I licked out all the pots. You've been like Langston Hughes to that poem, Mother to Son, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Could you talk to me maybe about one moment or what you do when you get knocked down like that? Where do you get the grit and the guts to get back up and keep on going?
Well, Senator, I think that too is something that I learned from my grandparents, who, as I said, didn't have it easy. My grandparents, who didn't have a lot of formal education, but who were the hardest working people I've ever known, and who just got up every day and put one foot after the other and provided for their families and made sure that their children went to college, even though they never had those opportunities. I reflect on them in the context of this historic moment. I stand on the shoulders of people from that generation, and I focus at times on my faith when I'm going through hard times. Those are the kinds of things that I learned from my grandmother, who used to have those family dinners and bring us all together. And I think that's a common experience of Americans, that when you go through difficult times, you lean into family and you turn to faith. And that's part of my experience as well.
It's, I think, the experience of my colleagues and I on both sides of the aisle, leaning on that faith and that family. I want to give you, there's one thing about your opening statement